Hi, my name is Morial Shah. I'm an assistant professor at IBA Karachi, where I teach corporate law, business law, and governance. I'm also the Asia lead consultant for Politas Consulting, where I work on special economic zones and foreign direct investment. I'm an attorney and mediator here in New York, and I am thrilled to be speaking with you today about some of my professional milestones and challenges, as well as my work on gender equality. So before you go ahead and tune out for the next 15 minutes, there's one thing that I want you to take away from this talk, and that's this. Try to balance your fear of failure with faith in your work. What do I mean by that? Our fear of failure or our desire to be perfect enables us to work harder. It's what causes us to study harder for that exam or test that we're studying for. It enables us to work harder on that assignment that we're doing at work. But in excess, it can cripple us. It can prevent us from engaging in new initiatives. It can prevent us from applying for new things. It can prevent us from putting our work forward. And as women and girls who are socialized to think that we don't belong in the public sphere, that's something that we might end up doing, and that might end up damaging our professional growth. I'll give you a personal example of this. As a researcher, I have to constantly face and be prepared to face rejection, criticism, failure. When I write my drafts, there's a chance that my colleagues who are peer reviewing might tear them apart. When I'm presenting at a conference, there's a chance that I might get yelled at from other colleagues who disagree with me. And then there's this very real possibility that my work might not get published, or if it gets published, someone else might write a rejoinder, etc., to disagree, and so on and so forth. So when I was beginning my publication journey, when I was writing my first law journal article, I wrote several drafts, and then I did nothing with it. It was sitting on my computer for months. I was scared of publishing it. I was scared that it wasn't going to get published, that I was completely wrong, that everybody would disagree with me. Why would anybody want to listen to me? I had all these fears, doubts, and so I just did nothing with it. And then I reflected and I realized, wait, what is the worst thing that I'm afraid of? That they're not going to publish it? So what? It's not going to be published if it's sitting on my computer. That they're going to disagree with me? That always can happen. And so what if they do? If they disagree with me, that means they might actually read my work, which is kind of a good thing, right? So I went ahead and I sent it to all these law journals. And guess what? My first article got published in the world's best ranked law journal in that subject area. And not only that, after that got published, I got good feedback, and I heard from Hart Publishing in the UK. Hart Publishing is one of UK's largest publisher of law textbooks. I think nearly every law textbook that I had back in my day at Cambridge was published by Hart Publishing. And they wanted me to be their expert evaluator for law textbooks that are published on that subject, because of my article in that subject area. And what does an expert evaluator do? I determine whether other textbooks in that subject area are going to get published. And so that happened, and I've been writing for other law journals that are well ranked. I've done well. I'm invited to these panels to speak. Sometimes I speak alongside professors who were my professors who have 20 to 30 years of experience, or sometimes with experienced practitioners, sometimes with law firm partners, sometimes with people who've been at the World Bank for 20, 30 years. And when I'm on these panels, I have to constantly remind myself that they're not doing me a favor by including me, that they didn't send me an email inviting me by accident, that I'm not an extra, that I'm not there to carry somebody's coffee, that I'm not an intern. I'm there because I wrote a paper and experts in the field thought that my paper made me, or thought that my paper deserved or won for me the seat at the table on the panel. And so I encourage all the girls who question themselves and who worry about rejection and don't put their work out there to go ahead and put it out there. You'd be surprised how much the world might want to listen to you. When I was writing, or when I write, I have all these reasons to worry about why I might not get published at all. I sit and operate out of a university in Pakistan, which people outside Pakistan might not even know about, right? My university doesn't have the same kind of brand as, say, a university in the West, like one of these Ivy Leagues. I don't have that brand going for me. I don't have access to law journal resources of the kind that professors in the West have. I don't have the kind of research infrastructure that professors in the West and the global North have. But I try my best and I put my voice out there, and they listen to my voice and they include my work, irrespective of the fact that I'm a woman of color, I'm writing from Pakistan, and I'm working at a university which they may not know about. None of that matters. They look at the quality of my research and they engage with me on that basis, and that's wonderful. And I want to encourage all the young girls here, particularly any girls who may have an inclination to do research, to go ahead, research, write, publish. In my mentoring practice as a professor, I also find this problem come up with the girls that I speak to. They do wonderful work, but they're worried about whether it's good enough, and so they don't put themselves out there and they don't put their work out there. And another area where I find girls being held back is in this area of, particularly in the academic context, when it comes to applying to universities for further education. I find many girls held back because they're worried about getting rejected. And what I tell them is, if you don't apply, there's no question even of being rejected. I mean, you're not getting in either way, so it's the same kind of thing. Go ahead, at least put in the effort of applying, and then you can know for sure whether it's a no or not. And don't give up, like keep trying, right? You might get in somewhere. And the other thing that holds them back is this fear that they have with regard to not having enough financial resources, and for those of us who belong to Pakistan, we face visa constraints everywhere. So they think that they might not get a visa, and so then they don't want to apply. I want to tell you that I have a Pakistani passport, and my parents didn't have the money for me to go to Georgetown, Cambridge, Columbia. I went to all three places. There are resources and opportunities out there if you're good. If you work on improving yourself, you improve your skills, and you do good work, and you work hard, you apply, you'd be surprised at how much the world would value your presence and how much the world would values your voice. So go ahead, don't give in to the fear of failure. Don't listen to the naysayers. You do you, and you'll do great. So with that said, I'm now going to move ahead and talk about, I'm going to move on and talk about gender equality. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some frames. I'm going to give you some definitional frames and some strategic frames before I move ahead and talk about my own research on gender equality, right? So when we talk about gender equality, what are we talking about? Are we talking about gender equality in the formal sense that men and women, though biologically different, deserve to be treated in the same way? Or are we talking about gender equality in the substantive sense that not only do they deserve to be treated in the same way, they deserve the same opportunities? And within this conversation, there are then other threads. For instance, Professor Catherine McKinnon writes about the anti-subordination thread, which is women have been subordinated, and gender equality's work consists of freeing them from that subordination. And then there's this other thread of anti-stereotyping, which is both genders have been shackled through these gender stereotypes, and they deserve to be freed from it for there to be gender equality. So there are all these different conversations and threads for us to explore. And I'm hoping that over the next few days, as you participate in this panel and its various discussions on gender equality, that these are ideas that you will engage with further. Beyond these definitional threads, I want us to explore strategic elements, right? So when we want to fight gender equality, where do we begin where do we start to look for it? Laws and policies are a good place to look. Often they help perpetuate discrimination and gender inequality. Gender stereotypes are a good place to look. Social norms are a good place to look. And then within the realm of law and policies, I think an interesting question for our panels to engage with would be, in the context of the Me Too movement, are countries around the world doing enough to change their laws of evidence to make sure that women are believed in contexts where we have a situation of he said, she said? Because till women get believed and till the law enables them to bring forth these claims, they might be discouraged to bring them forth, and then all these issues with regard to discrimination and harassment and sexual violence might continue to persist. So that's one interesting thread that perhaps our panels could explore. Another interesting thread would be Justice Ginsburg recently passed away, and I know that there's going to be a Ginsburg panel at this summit. So when we're discussing Justice Ginsburg, particularly her strategy in her days as a litigator, it would be interesting to explore some part of her strategy which related to the cases that she brought forth on behalf of male plaintiffs or male claimants. What was that about? So she figured that since the judges were all men, they were more likely to relate to the experiences of other men. So she brought forth these claims on behalf of men who were alleging that they faced discrimination based on sex. And she hoped that with judges being able to resonate with those men, the door would open a little bit wider for women bringing similar claims. Now, what she was doing back in the 70s. We're now in 2020. But perhaps in the global south, we might want to engage more with whether that kind of strategy is something we're going to have to incorporate as we move forward. We may or may not want to incorporate it, but it's something that perhaps we should discuss. And then, having discussed these definitional issues and some strategic issues, I now move ahead and talk about my own research on gender equality. My research is in the area of gender and negotiation. Now, you might think that that's a bit unconventional for a law professor working on gender equality. Why don't I just look at a law that perpetuates gender inequality or discrimination and then talk about how that should be changed? I'll explain that by explaining why I think negotiation and gendered effects in negotiation are important. So negotiation is becoming increasingly important for lawyers. And that's because of a number of reasons, but primarily it's because we're seeing that litigation, traditional litigation practice is changing. Cases are no longer proceeding to trial in the fashion that they used to. We're seeing more settlements. And as we're seeing more settlements, we're starting to value lawyers with negotiation skills who are able to bring forward for their clients successful settlement deals. Deals were already important in the corporate area where lawyers had to have negotiation skills. So many law schools have introduced negotiation seminars and workshops and negotiation classes. So we engage deeply with the issue of how to teach negotiation to the next generation of lawyers. In addition to negotiation becoming more important in the law, negotiation is important in for careers in business, finance, engineering, medicine, and other areas. It's a versatile skill, and it's perhaps becoming increasingly important as mechanization proceeds and as more and more jobs more and more menial jobs get mechanized. Skills such as soft skills such as negotiation, which we hope machines won't be doing anytime soon, are becoming important. But I speak with my foot in my mouth. I don't actually know whether machines are going to start negotiating anytime soon. But so negotiation is important, and we're seeing a gendered effect within negotiations, which raises concerns for whether we are able to substantively achieve gender equality. Now, what are those concerns? In some areas of negotiation, women are actually doing just fine. So women's participation in peace-building negotiations helps improve the chances of those negotiations succeeding in bringing about viable long-term peace. There are many reasons for that, but partly that has to do with the way women are socialized to think of long-term relationships, to think in communal terms, to listen. Those factors help those negotiations succeed. But we're not seeing similar success for women when it comes to negotiations that are distributive or numerical. What do I mean by these distributive contexts? These are contexts where, rightly or wrongly, parties may think that the cake is, or the pie is fixed. There's just this cake, and either you can have a big slice of it or I can, and the bigger my slice, the smaller your slice, right? So that's the kind of context where we're seeing women underperform. And a specific kind of example of that is salary negotiations. In the area of salary negotiations, Professor Linda Babcock and Sarah Lashover's very famous research on a group of Carnegie Mellon MBA students showed that only 7% of women who graduated from that MBA program negotiated their starting salary, whereas 57% of men negotiated their starting salary. What does that mean? What were the implications of that? Well, women started off earning a smaller starting salary when compared with similarly qualified males. And then throughout their careers, they got increments based on that smaller starting salary. So they were earning less throughout their careers in general. And they left as much as an estimated $1.5 million on the table for their career because they didn't negotiate their starting salary. When I read this research, I related it to my own experience. Back when I was in law school at Cambridge, negotiation wasn't that big a thing. We weren't really taught it at law school. There wasn't much conversation about it. When I started my first law firm job and my first university job, I didn't negotiate my starting salary. At my university, where I didn't negotiate my starting salary, I realized that similarly qualified men who had the same skills that I had were paid more to start with. And then when I calculated the difference, and then we all got yearly increments that were the same in percentage terms. So when I calculated the difference, I realized that I had left as much as 6 million Pakistani rupees on the table over the course of just 5 years because I didn't negotiate my initial salary. And that was devastating for me, but it was further devastating for me in my research when I found that this trend continues to persist, right? So what's the solution? Women aren't asking for their starting salaries. Should they just start asking for salaries that are higher? Should they just start negotiating? It's actually not that simple, because even when they do ask, there are all kinds of stereotypes and factors in the mix that make the chances of them succeeding in asking when compared with men slightly lower. I'll explain some of those, but I can't explain all those stereotypes in the rest of my talk. But I encourage you to read more on this issue. Most of the law journal research that's been done on this issue, particularly for US law journals, is open access. So you can Google and find that research. You can also find my article available on the internet. It's open access. So some of the stereotypes that make it harder for women to successfully ask are, first we have the power stereotype, right? The power theory suggests that negotiators who think they are powerful end up performing better. And men, because they are socialized and raised to think that they are powerful and to be confident, they end up doing better. They set more ambitious targets and they don't settle for less. Research has also shown that men, even when they are underprepared, think that they can wing it, whereas women, even when they are overprepared, think that they're not prepared at all and think the worst and have the worst kind of perception of their own sense of achievement and their own confidence, and that then interacts with their ability to negotiate well. And then further complicating the picture in these numerical contexts is this stereotype, which I'm sure we've all heard of, which is girls don't do math. Some women, consciously or unconsciously, internalize this stereotype, as a consequence of which, when they're sitting at a negotiating table having to deal with numbers, they feel very uncomfortable. And add to that further the stereotype that lawyers don't do math. So women lawyers find themselves feeling particularly uncomfortable. And that then impacts the numbers that they're able to bring home for themselves. Add to that then this other aspect of, even if women haven't necessarily internalized these stereotypes or aren't particularly conforming to those stereotypes in their negotiations, add to that situation the complexity of the other side, thinking that women should conform to certain stereotypes or certain kinds of behaviors and having expectations around that. So what do I mean? I mean that, for instance, in studies have suggested that women and men, when they ask for the same thing, men, when they ask for that number for their salary, they're seen as being assertive. But women, when they ask for that number, are seen as being aggressive, as being pushy. They get the B word label. And so the situation becomes very complex. It's not just about the stereotypes or the behavior that women might themselves be conforming with. It also has to do with the other side stereotypes and behavioral expectations, etc., etc. So what do we do? Some professors thought that we could try to fix this or improve this through formal training. And Professor Craver, for his law school negotiation class, designed an experiment whereby which he measured the gendered differences in negotiation outcomes before and after formal training. He trained both men and women, and unfortunately, at the end of the formal training, through the study that he did, he found that gender-based differences in negotiated outcomes continued to persist. Women still were not winning. So what's the solution? Should we give up on formal training? I don't think so. I think we need to study formal training in greater detail. We need to study the kind of formal training and the duration of formal training that's been given. And we also need further study on contextual factors. So for instance, what role does prior relationship between the participants play during the negotiation? What role does socioeconomic factors at play in the negotiation have? What role does ethnicity play? What role does race play? What role does religion play? And we haven't even started to engage with issues on the gender spectrum, of issues related to gender fluidity or identification with being trans. We don't know what impact they have. Those remain understudied in this area. And so if any of you are interested, I encourage you to read more. I encourage you to research on this area. And more than anything, I encourage you to be cognizant of some of these factors as you negotiate your way through your professional lives. Because it's not just important, we've done the first step, I feel, of having negotiated for women to come out and have a presence in the public sphere. Now we need to give them the tools to negotiate that sphere and do well. I'm going to leave you with this. The tragedy of the modern world isn't merely that women were not included in the shaping of the modern world. I repeat, the tragedy of the modern world isn't merely that women were not engaged in the shaping of the modern world. The tragedy of the modern world is that women don't have the tools to negotiate with it. Thank you.